How did Japan quickly rise from the ashes of World War II, transforming into an unprecedented economic miracle, and then later experiencing one of the largest asset bubbles in modern history, followed by a significant economic downturn? To understand these questions, we need to start from the aftermath of World War II. After the war, Japan faced the enormous challenge of rebuilding, as approximately 40% of its factories and infrastructure were destroyed. This left the nation grappling with shortages of essential resources, stagnant production, and a surge in unemployment as military production ceased, leading to around 4.2 million jobless workers and a somber national mood. To add to its woes, Japan was burdened with significant war debt. During the years from 1945 to 1949, Japan's economic system was in shambles, with most transactions taking place on the black market due to a lack of regulatory oversight. Organized crime and fraud ran rampant in this environment. However, it was during this period that the United States implemented support policies for Japan. They provided financial aid, technological assistance, and assisted in various business reforms. Then why was the United States so kind as to help Japan? In World War II, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, then the US dropped 2 atomic bombs, and the two countries fought fiercely. The answer lies in the dynamics of the post-World War II era. The world was in the midst of the Cold War, with the United States and the Soviet Union as the two superpowers. The United States was concerned that Japan might align with the Soviet Union and become a socialist nation, potentially jeopardizing American influence in East Asia. Therefore, they decided to align with Japan, as there are no permanent enemies, only permanent interests. The United States indeed went to great lengths to assist Japan, both financially and through expertise, in restructuring its economy. They also dismantled the monopolistic control of Japanese zaibatsus over national industries. This collaborative effort played a pivotal role in Japan's post-war recovery and its eventual emergence as an economic powerhouse. Prior to World War II, Japan's key industries were dominated by a handful of family conglomerates known as zaibatsu. These zaibatsu were characterized by their close-knit and influential networks. Zaibatsu were behind several wars waged by Japan in the 20th century. However, after World War II, the Japanese government, under the guidance of the United States, implemented a series of policies that led to the dissolution of these zaibatsu conglomerates, with many of their assets being nationalized. This marked a significant shift in Japan's economic landscape. In 1950, the outbreak of the Korean War led to a surge in demand for goods, and Japan, with its reactivated factories, was well positioned to benefit from this demand. The war provided Japan with substantial military contracts, and its foreign exchange reserves soared from $290 million in 1950 to $1.18 billion in 1952. Industries such as machinery, transportation, shipbuilding, steel, and chemicals, which were related to wartime production, flourished during this period, kickstarting Japan's post-war economic recovery. Having tasted success, Japan decided to focus on economic development, following a policy of enrich the country, strengthen the military. With the presence of American military forces stationed in Japan, the country saved considerable defense expenses, at times even falling below 1% of its GDP. From 1960 onwards, Japanese companies imported advanced American technologies in large numbers. To compete in the international market, Japan implemented measures to protect major export-oriented businesses and simultaneously invested in scientific education and talent acquisition, laying the foundation for an export-oriented industrial base. From then on, Japan's economy experienced a resurgence. With its low prices and labor costs, Japan capitalized on the wave of globalization, becoming the world's factory and a major exporting nation. From the 1960s to the 1970s, Japan consistently achieved annual growth rates ranging from 10% to 20%, earning it the moniker of the Japanese economic miracle. Although the previous zaibatsu were split up by the US and their assets were nationalized, when Japan's economy began to recover, these zaibatsu gathered again, only under a new name called keiretsu, and they would dominate Japan's economy for the next half-century. Keiretsu maintained the tradition of close cooperation and resource integration. They revolved around banks and spanned various sectors, nurturing industrial giants in fields like automotive and electronics, including companies like Panasonic, Toyota, and Honda. These conglomerates formed a supportive ecosystem where funding, sales channels, and thousands of interconnected companies reduced unnecessary competition. Additionally, Japan's practice of lifetime employment for workers in these firms proved to be instrumental during the early stages of industrial development. The 1970s marked a significant turning point for Japan. During this period, two oil crises, in 1973 and 1979, led to soaring oil prices. Japan, heavily reliant on oil imports, faced resource shortages. In response, its manufacturing industry shifted towards high value-added processes. For example, Japanese cars were not only efficient but also fuel efficient, making them highly popular globally. Paradoxically, the oil crises presented Japan with new opportunities, prompting a technological transformation in its industrial sector. By 1980, Japan's automobile industry had overtaken the United States to become the world leader. High-tech industries like consumer electronics, semiconductors, and computers were at the forefront. Prolonged trade surpluses accumulated substantial wealth. Japan also began to make its mark in education and cultural industries, achieving success in areas such as film, animation, and even Nobel Prizes, rivaling developed nations. The mentality of both companies and individuals changed at a time when there was a huge shortage of human resources in Japanese society, and hundreds of companies were closing down every year due to a lack of manpower. The lifestyle transitioned from frugal to prosperous, and eventually luxurious. Japanese individuals and companies embarked on a frenzy of buying stocks, real estate, and luxury goods. By 1988, Japan had amassed over $90 billion in foreign exchange reserves, topping the global charts. Conversely, the United States faced a challenging period. First, it was deeply embroiled in the quagmire of the Vietnam War. Then, it encountered two oil crises, leading to severe economic stagflation, with unemployment rates surging to 10%. The American auto industry alone witnessed over 60,000 job losses. Alongside a deteriorating trade deficit, American sentiment shifted towards Japanese brands. Unemployed American workers even began smashing Japanese cars on the streets, and there were instances of politicians publicly destroying Japanese electronics in front of the White House. To appease public sentiment and address the threat from Japan, U.S. politicians initiated a trade war. In 1983, they imposed a 45% tariff on Japanese motorcycles. In 1985, they pressured Japan to increase imports of American agricultural products and imposed restrictions on the number of Japanese cars allowed into the U.S., along with additional tariffs on Japanese electronic products. However, these measures proved insufficient, and the United States adopted a more significant strategy, devaluing the U.S. dollar. On September 22, 1985, the United States convened representatives from Japan, Germany, the UK, France, and other countries to negotiate the famous Plaza Accord at the Plaza Hotel in New York. The Plaza Accord had two main objectives. First, it involved other countries selling the US dollar to devalue it, enhancing American competitiveness in exporting goods. Second, it aimed to liberalize markets to increase imports of American products. Why did other nations agree to this accord? On one hand, the United States possessed the largest trade market, and export-dependent countries like Japan had to continue doing business with it. On the other hand, the U.S. held considerable economic and military power, despite its economic downturn. Following the Plaza Accord, countries began selling the U.S. dollar as agreed. As anticipated, the U.S. dollar depreciated, and the Japanese yen appreciated significantly, nearly doubling in value against the U.S. dollar within a year. This had a profound impact, making Japanese goods much more expensive for other countries to buy. What was the impact of this? The prices of Japanese goods doubled for other countries, making them less competitive. This situation created challenges for Japanese export companies, as the primary reason people had been buying Japanese products before was their affordability and quality. The Japanese government, in order to counteract the strengthening of their currency, adopted a solution by lowering interest rates. Between January 1986 and February 1987, the Bank of Japan reduced interest rates from 5% to 2.5%. Lowering interest rates had a dual purpose. It aimed to stimulate the economy by encouraging people to invest and spend the money they had saved, and also to devalue the currency. However, this strategy had its drawbacks. The lower interest rates made borrowing money more accessible, and some speculators saw the opportunity to buy Japanese yen in anticipation of its future appreciation. To further boost the economy, the central bank implemented extremely lenient monetary policies. This made it exceptionally easy for both businesses and individuals to obtain loans. In some cases, even if you wanted to borrow 10 million, the bank might approve 12 million. With access to significant loans, there came a need to spend that money somewhere. Investing in manufacturing, with its longer return on investment, was less appealing compared to the rapidly rising stock market and real estate. This trend wasn't limited to Japanese citizens. Even foreign speculators were pouring money into Japan, fearing they'd miss out on potential profits. In just a year, the Japanese yen appreciated by 80%. Between 1985 and 1991, the average price of commercial housing in Japan tripled, reaching astonishing levels, particularly in Tokyo's Ginza district. The stock market also witnessed extreme growth, with indices surging from around 10,000 points in 1983 to 39,000 points by the end of 1989. At its peak, the total market value of Japanese stocks reached approximately $4 trillion, close to half of the world's total market value. By the 1990s, 7 out of the top 10 highest valued global companies were Japanese. Many Japanese companies invested heavily in stocks, as they often generated more profits than selling products. Yet, the enormous surplus of money found in Japan couldn't be spent domestically, leading to a frenzy of overseas investments. At one point, almost half of the properties in the downtown Los Angeles area were owned by Japanese citizens, and over 90% of foreign investments in apartments and hotels in Hawaii came from Japan. Japanese corporations also embarked on massive overseas acquisitions. Between 1985 and 1990, they executed 21 megadeals, each worth over 50 billion yen, and 18 of those acquisitions involved American companies. For instance, Sony spent $3.4 billion to acquire Columbia Pictures, and Mitsubishi Estate purchased the Rockefeller Center in New York without conducting any market research. This economic environment created an enormous bubble in Japan, with a considerable amount of funds flowing into financial markets and real estate, while the real economy suffered. The Japanese government eventually realized the issue but faced difficulties in raising interest rates. First, the United States, which had just stabilized its economy, prevented Japan from increasing rates to maintain the stability of the US dollar. Second, concerns about a stock market crash, given the close ties between Japanese financial institutions and the stock market, delayed the decision to raise interest rates. Lastly, internal conflicts between Japan's highest financial authorities also played a role in the delay. In the end, when they couldn't delay any longer, they decided to raise interest rates to burst the bubble. Starting in May 1989, the Bank of Japan increased interest rates 5 times in 15 months, going from 2.5% to 6%. This abrupt tightening of monetary policy was like a needle puncturing a balloon. The stock market, which had reached its peak in December 1989, began to plummet, losing 20% within a few weeks. This marked the beginning of the stock market's decline. The sudden shift in the market caused panic among stockholders and resulted in a 30-month-long bear market, which was followed by a significant economic loss, reaching into the trillions of yen. The real estate market's decline was somewhat slower, with property values decreasing by a third over 2 years. However, as foreign investors also started exiting the market, no one was willing to take over the properties. Consequently, numerous businesses across the country had to lay off employees or shut down. Japan faced a wave of unemployment, with the job placement rate for recent college graduates dropping from a high of 85% to 55%. People who had borrowed significant sums for stock investments and real estate found it difficult to repay their debts. Some chose to flee, while others, in extreme cases, resorted to suicide. Japan, at the time, lacked a mature personal bankruptcy system, resulting in situations where individuals owed more than their assets were worth. When a nation's citizens and businesses allocate all their earnings towards debt repayment instead of investing in growth and innovation, the economy is bound to suffer. As companies struggled to stay afloat, many resorted to selling off their overseas assets. In July 1996, Mitsubishi Corporation sold 14 buildings of the Rockefeller Center, returning them to the American Rockefeller family. The Asian financial crisis of 1997 further aggravated Japan's economic woes. At this point, people had lost hope in the future and began saving money while refraining from both spending and investing. Even though interest rates on savings had become negative and banks were charging account management fees, people were reluctant to withdraw their money. Properties, with zero down payment and discounted interest rates, found no buyers. Surviving businesses refrained from taking out further loans. as they were preoccupied with debt repayment, leaving little room for technology and research development. Eventually, South Korean companies, which had consistently invested in technology, surpassed Japanese competitors and took over markets like the electronics industry, household appliances, and semiconductors. In an effort to stimulate domestic demand, Japan issued consumption vouchers worth over 7,000 yen in 1999. However, the result was a significant decline in consumer spending. Most residents saved the money instead of using it for anything other than essential goods. As the 21st century began, Japan saw the rise of its otaku culture and a growing number of hikikomori individuals, often referred to as modern-day hermits. These individuals rarely left their homes and had little interest in socializing, attending school, or working. Estimates suggested that around 500,000 young Japanese people became social recluses, with over 500,000 middle-aged individuals doing the same. Many young people became less interested in dating, forming families, and even those who were married were less inclined to have children. Meanwhile, Japan's elderly population continued to grow, leading to a serious problem of aging demographics. Japan's corporate landscape also faced challenges. Due to a lack of entrepreneurial spirit, Japanese companies had limited presence in the rapidly evolving internet industry after 2000. By 2010, Japan's electronics industry had lost its last opportunities, as companies like Sharp, Toshiba, Sony, and others were no longer dominant players in appliances and consumer electronics. In 2013, the American automotive magazine, Motor Trend, awarded Tesla's Model S the title of the annual car of the year, breaking the long-standing dominance of Japanese cars in this category. Numerous emerging car companies had begun to chip away at Japan's market share. Japan's once leading position in the field of electric vehicles also faded. This is the story of Japan's lost 30 years. During this time, Japan implemented various recovery methods, such as the central bank's negative interest rates, extremely loose monetary policies, and Abenomics, among others. While Japan's GDP remains similar to what it was 30 years ago, it's still the world's third largest economy, and many Japanese companies have quietly transitioned during these decades. Today, I've provided a general overview of Japan's economic history. There are many fascinating details that haven't been discussed, and Japan's tumultuous journey has also given rise to numerous intriguing films, anime, music, and cultural works. If you're interested, feel free to follow my channel, and we can explore these topics further in the future.